If you want to learn sales for vibe coding projects, I'm going to go through a little bit of my process as far as the preparation for that today. I'm going to go through a document that is my prep document that's going to turn into a proposal that's going to be the thing that I send off to the client that they're going to digest before the call where I hop on and we talk about that and any sort of next steps forward, right? Because right now in this project, I'm sitting in that pocket where I've had a paid audit of what they currently have. In that paid audit, we've discovered a lot of potential to build something, but I need to sell them on that next something. And that next something is going to be a lot more than the initial audit. So I have to make sure that we're pulling out all the opportunities to show the value that we can deliver and also talk about the technical side in a way that is simple enough for them to understand, but deep enough for them to know that we know what we're talking about. Okay. If you've been wanting to do something with AI, but you don't know what, this could be a potential avenue for you. There's broad AI agencies where you can go and understand different things like automations, connections, chatbots, and even a little bit of software, or you can zero in on something. And that's what I'm doing. I'm zeroing in on product design and engineering fueled with AI. If you want to see my school, this is Vibe Code Cowboys, where I go through all the fundamentals of how to build these things and then also how to be in the market with these things, meaning how to promote, how to sell, how to deliver, how to manage clients. All these different individual things are inside here, and you can make sure you check it out at the link in the description. So I had a previous video going over my initial thoughts on a front page and the initial kind of onboarding sequence of the app that we're talking about here. Since then, I've dived into a lot of different components of that build on the code side of things and the front side of things. So every app has a front end and a back end. And if you want to do this thing, you have to know how to do both. So going through this audit, you can see the 6 main categories I focused on were core functionality, user experience, code base, cleanliness, database architecture, authorization and security, and scalability. These to me are like the big pillars, because if you can get these things right, then you basically have a fully functioning app. You have a good experience for the user and you have a good backend for the owner. Okay. So I just want to go through these parts one more time after a conversation that I had today with this client to make sure that we're speaking kind of to their language and to the way that they see what this product could be. There's a lot of potential functionality that I saw by looking at the code and looking at the product myself, but always getting it from the user or the owner of the code base themselves is going to be the best way to make sure that you're building for them precisely and you build the solutions that they're looking for. With any sort of sales process, the more you can understand the problem, the better you can speak to the solution. And in fact, if you don't spend time on that, people can still hear what you say, but it just doesn't land as deep because they don't feel like they're being understood. And I know that can seem subjective. That can seem like, why would that even matter? But it's a part of the human process of getting someone to trust you as a solution person, right? If I talk to a plumber and he doesn't ask me at least a few questions about what is the water doing? Does it turn on and off when you move the faucet? If you shake it a little bit, does it do this? If you tap this, does it do that? If he's not asking me a few questions like that, I don't trust his capabilities to even diagnose an issue. I wouldn't like the idea of him coming in and starting to do stuff, especially not charging me any money. That being said, we're going to move into this here, and I'm going to read some of this stuff and talk about why I have it here, and I'm probably going to have to make some adjustments. So me and my partner had a conversation today with this client. This conversation was helping us understand the user experience and the goals for these particular platforms. It's one thing to open up the code base and to see what they have going on underneath the hood, but you also need to just ask them, what would you like to experience this as? Right? Because even though I can get a car in and diagnose its problems, I can see that it has low tire pressure, it has a dent in the rear, it has a muffler that's kind of loud, it has an issue over here that's kind of a leak, and the AC is a little bit low, and the radio doesn't have an antenna. There's all these problems, but if I don't ask the person how they drive their car and what they like to use, then I don't know which one they care about. Because maybe you have a person that they don't listen to the radio, they have their headphones in the whole time, and they just have a long commute that's in the sun. So we need to make sure the AC is there and the tires are taken care of, right? Or you might have the person that doesn't even leave their apartment complex. They just go into their car to chill out at the end of the day, maybe do something, This is coming from a real story, right? I live in Arizona where weed is legal. and I have a guy in my complex who I don't really see leave the facility very often. He goes in there, has a little bit of a session, if you know what I mean, listens to some music and has a good time, right? More power to him. But if you have someone like that, then that person is not going to care as much about the tires or the antenna because he's using Bluetooth, and AC is kind of an okay thing, but more than anything, you just got to make sure that the car is okay sitting in idle, right? So that's what I mean by making sure that you understand the user experience. You're not just building to have perfect code, and you're not just building for your vision of what the people want. You're building to have something that speaks to what that individual wants. That being said, these were the core questions that I asked the individual. Who are the core users for this platform? What part of the day or week do they use this and how many times? What are the 1 to 2 things users do most with this? What are the biggest frictions or frustration points with these workflows? What does the ideal product look like in the next 3 months, right? I asked some version of these, and I also went with the conversation a little bit to understand what was going on. So in this particular case, they're having 3 different types of SOPs, and it's going to be the operator or the maintenance individual at a treatment plant. It's a water treatment facility. Essentially what they have is SOPs for particular pieces of equipment, and then SOPs for a process that can contain multiple pieces of equipment. These types of documents are typical admin work where an individual or a company needs to outline the specific steps of what someone does so that when someone new comes into place, they can look at that document, understand what they need to do, and then move forward. They don't need to be trained for months and months from an individual that has all this information in their head and they don't know how to explain it very clearly. So the app that we're building is going to be 2-pronged. One is just for the storage and creation of these sorts of things. But 2, it's also going to be kind of like an SOP writing assistant. So it has to help someone get the information from their head, display it in a very simple way, let them edit it in a way that seems clear and simple and not overwhelming, and then clean that up, store it, and be able to basically export that or display that to an individual that is going to be taking up that place. Okay. So a couple other notes here is that there is a 3rd type of SOP called the lab SOP that's very detail heavy, but it's okay if that's built out later, which is good to know because again, if I were to go in there and talk about this one as going to be like the main focus, they wouldn't feel that we were paying attention to what they really needed. Another couple of notes here. There's 2 different roles, one who's a creator, one who's a viewer. The use case is typically going to be a huge batch, but there is kind of a drip basis as well. They're thinking that they're going to structure this as a subscription product with 1 to 25 SOPs in one layer, 25 to 50 in another layer, and so on and so forth. And then they gave me some examples of different types of kind of tiers of individuals that might use this. The people that we'd ideally go for are like the medium, small size businesses that are right now using Excels or Word docs, and they're probably doing it in a disorganized fashion, and it's hard to modify. I tried to drill in on how much this type of work typically costs a company for 2 reasons. I wanted to figure out what problem this product would solve for the end users, and I wanted to understand how much those users would be enticed to use this product, and then that would help me understand how much I could charge for building this product. Because if they have an expected return on their industry, then I can see an expected return from me to them. Okay. And last thing here was a couple of notes about the kind of individuals that were going to be using this, where they're very talented in what they do. They have a lot of industry experience and mechanical knowledge, but they're not able to put that into documents, or they're just not willing to put that into documents, which is very common, right? You have people that do things that are very technically precise and very technically high level, but they're unable to explain it in a very clear level. And so people can't learn what they do. And you know this, right? If you've ever had to fix your car and you've looked around for different YouTubers and stuff, you probably naturally gravitate to the individual that has a better speaking cadence, the ability to break down ideas simply, and doesn't get lost in the weeds of, millimeters and bolts and very precise things that are kind of industry knowledge. It's very like, dumbing it down is one way to think about it, but also just relating it to people, right? That's why an educator is considered a good educator. That's why trainers are considered good. Now that I've looked at all those notes from the call, I want to go into this document that I have here, Just double check everything is the way that I want it to be. Basically, are we highlighting the key points that come up? And are we talking about the solutions that would make the most sense for that?
So we are a couple days removed from that last time we're looking at the stock. I went ahead and made some more changes and organized things a little bit better according to those principles I was telling you about. Making sure that the initial paragraph or line underneath the heading was doing a lot of the explaining. The bullet points were enough in the terms of like technical expertise to demonstrate that expertise, but enough in like human language so that a layman could understand them. Someone who's not inside of an IDE all day could understand them and then see the importance of these action items. Okay. So I went ahead and got this to a place that I'm pretty happy with. It is basically covering over all the major components that I outlined before, and we are at 6 pages. I don't want this to be so much that a person will actually not read it, or they will see it and consider it to be slop in some sort of way. There's a component about presenting your findings that if you do it in a way that's simple, can actually display more confidence versus if you do it in display where you're over talking, can show that you're actually full of BS, right? And this shows up in marketing as much as it does in sales. If you're selling something and you can't stop blabbermouthing and you just talk and talk and talk and talk, you're never doing enough listening to the prospect to hear what they actually need. And so, by its own nature, you're not able to really sell properly. When it comes to things like this, someone has to read this information or they're having you walk them through it. And very similarly, if you're spending 5, 8, 12 minutes going through all your presentation, someone's going to check out. It's the same thing with any sort of deck, any sort of speech, or anything like that. You have to kind of interject moments for people to actually kind of wake up again, for them to snap out of the haze or the trance of just being distracted by other things in life, right? And again, it's just human nature. So as much as you want to put like all these different things and components and like text and reasoning and all that stuff inside this, it's better to make it simple and easily explained. And then if someone wants to go a layer deeper, let them know that you're more than willing to answer those questions. But what you're giving them is you're giving them is a level of like enough clarity, enough resolution to see what they need to know. Everything else you can handle underneath. Okay. Using that metaphor of a car, once again, you're going to tell someone that a engine is causing problems and restrictions in the car going fast and being efficient. You're not necessarily going to tell them that piston one and also this spark plug and also this hose and also this filter and also this leak and this other thing, it's what's causing the engine to give you problems. Some people are car guys and they're going to want it, right? Very similar here. Some people are going to know enough about technical stuff that they're going to want to understand that so that they understand either how to build it themselves or just to have a conversation with you. That being said, I'm pretty happy with where this is. If anything, we can style this up a little bit more to be a little easier on the eyes to read by adding things like underlines or anything like that. But for right now, I'm not going to worry too much about it. I think it covers most of it. And just to give you kind of an overview of what actually got figured out, the user experience, there's a lot of stuff that is just explained. There is a hero section that's missing, meaning there's not like an explainer section in the app to explain how to go through the app itself, right? The app is assuming too much, assuming that A, the person, the user is going to find it valuable, and B, the person is going to know how to extract that value by using it in a certain way. Going down from there, onboarding is very similar. Person doesn't know how to sign up and how to consistently use this thing. And that is super key because you want to make sure that the person's first time of using this or the person's first time of getting value from this is as smooth and easy and simple as possible. Because you have to kind of reach out and shake your hand digitally. And if you have a weak, limp wrist, and someone's going to judge you off of that handshake, right? So you want to have a nice, firm handshake that feels strong, that guides them through a process, and that makes sure that they get the value cleanly and quickly. From there, and kind of very closely related, you have navigation, which is typically the things along the top ribbon or the side panel where someone goes to the different parts of your app. And if this is not clear, or if it leads them to places that they get too distracted on, it can also lead to a situation where they're not getting that first piece of value as quickly as they could. As soon as someone feels overwhelmed, they're going to have a large possibility of just exiting the entire thing. You want to try to remove the probability that they're going to get lost or overwhelmed with clean navigation. Similarly, with design, you want to make sure that everything is laid out in a way that is not too visually scattered, has enough white space, and there's enough clarity on the hierarchy, meaning big important things are big visually. Small, unimportant things are small visually. And if you have buttons, they're different color and small little things like this. But design actually plays a huge role in leading someone's attention. If you know anything about photography or cinematography, you know that the layout and composition of elements within a frame really guide your eyes. A lot of times you don't even really know it, but the best directors, the best photographers are always setting things up, right? And if you use those principles in your design, you can kind of guide the user's perception. There's a way that you can actually track this, but a very common pattern that you'll see is something like this, where there is a hero section where you'll have information on the left, like a headline and a subheadline, and then some kind of icon or figure. So this one is exactly that. You have the headline, the subheadline, and then the face of the figure here. And usually that's how people work. They go from the top left and then scan to the right, like if you're reading a book. And this one paints it very clearly, right? So you want to have a lot of key information in the top left. Unless you're doing something like displaying a picture of a human, that can sometimes change everything. But typically, if it's going to be what most people are doing, which is something like a piece of information and then a photo, top left is where you want to have your most important tagline, headline, sales point, or whatever. So with all those in mind, if you set those things up properly, you can give yourself the best opportunity for people moving to the next step, which is core functionality. If people get overwhelmed and lost and don't know how to use the thing, it's not going to be as easy for them to use the thing and feel the actual functionality that you're going for. So now that we have it figured out, we move into the core functionality. Core functionality in this case is creating an SOP. In our case, the core functionality of creating an SOP was a little too cumbersome again. A little bit of the same idea of removing the overwhelm, of removing the confusion. I wanted to make sure that we had less checkboxes, less clicks, and less information, like text information, in order to get one of these produced. Once we got that done, then we had a section where there's uploading and processing. And this can be something that also scares a person away, because if you're asking them to upload a file and it's not clean and simple, very clearly labeled what you're expecting from them, and then also what works and doesn't work, and if that upload was successful, that's another point of potential frustration. So you want to make that nice and smooth, and these are the notes that I was talking about here. Lastly, we have the output and saving, which is basically once that core workflow, once that core functionality is done and delivered, we want to make sure that it's very clear that the person had a successful action, and it's very clear that the thing that they created is saved and there for them. They didn't just waste all that time. If you go and you create a profile and you go through the process of adding in your name, adding in your phone number, adding in your address, adding in even credit card information, and you're not clear that it was successful, it's going to feel like a huge waste of time and also a huge cause for distrust. So you want to make sure that part, that successful action, is very clear to the end user. Moving on from there, we have stuff that's a little bit less front facing and more in the back end. Code-based cleanliness is just making sure that we're looking through the files and keeping things as clean as possible. Something very common for all these tools like Bolt, Replit, Lovable is to have way too many files that are documentation files. So if you don't know what a README is, basically that should be your one pager for what the entire app does. An explainer, so that if someone were to download your GitHub or your code base, they can go to that README and basically understand the entire process of your app, any sort of build notes, any small technical requirements, and things like that. And ideally, it is something very clean, simplified, and easy to read at 200 lines max. Sometimes you will need some other things like extra docs, but those shouldn't be a whole lot more. Those should really only be reserved for things that are kind of out of the ordinary, or you want to make a special note of, but you don't want to have way too much. And in this case, we had quite a bit of those document files. Again, this is kind of standard for the Lovables and Bolts and Replits of the world. It's not exactly their fault, but it can be from sloppy prompting. And at the end, you end up with a lot more files than you need, and it makes the code base way more difficult. Because if you want to go back in and understand where you're coming from, like what the intention was, the README may no longer be accurate. Because instead of revising this, you added an extra document and then an extra document, and now you need 3 documents to understand, one, the thought process all the way through the different changes, and then just to kind of even understand all of it, right? And so if you're ever bringing in new engineers, or you yourself are trying to refer back to what you were thinking of, it makes it a lot more difficult. And here, that's just a bit of an explanation of why that should be avoided, the big files. Also, more importantly, we have big files within the build itself. So it's not just exactly the documentation, but it's also making sure that we clean up the lines of code within the actual build. Some of these components are 10,000 lines long. You want to avoid anything that big. Honestly, you want to probably get to at most 1,000, 2,000 lines, and that's still pushing it. Ideally, you get lower than that. I know some engineers are going to have their opinions on that, but as far as best practices and best principles, you want to go to a less is more kind of thing, and make sure that just every different thing has its own folder, right? If you have different processes within the code, you want to give them their own TSX file or HTML file, whatever makes sense in that case, but you want to give them their own component, right? If you want to have one process of uploading an image and one process of editing an image, you want to have separate components for that underneath a bigger folder that is anything image related, right? It's very basic categorization, but again, it can be difficult when you're kind of coding with a prompt that doesn't know exactly the intention behind all that. Going a little bit deeper, database architecture is the thing that holds the data that supports everything. So if you create a profile, if you run an SOP, if you have information that you input, that data in the database, in our case, Supabase, is going to be what holds all of it. And the architecture of that is very important to make retrieval easy and also to make sure that we're not bloating down anything and making the whole entire thing slower. If we have too much, we make the thing slower. And if you slow down your web page, you can actually also reduce user conversion and usage. Beyond that as well, we have authorization and security, making sure that the permissions that you want for individual users is very tight and clean. Meaning if you want someone to be a normal user versus an admin, obviously they're going to see and do different things on the app, and you want to make sure that that's encoded into the authorization portion. That's also, in a way, security, but then you also want to have outside security. People visiting the page, not just users internally, but people visiting the page from outside can't hack into it without a password and a username or things like that. And then the last one that I have here is scalability. Basically trying to highlight anything that might break as soon as they start adding more and more users, or as soon as they start moving into bigger projects, meaning things like file limits, timeout limits, rate limits, offline functionality, basically expanding the use of what the app currently is and making sure that it's built enough to withstand those changes. That covers a lot of what I believe the client would want to see to make sure that they have a full understanding of what we went through and then to feel confident in the recommendations that we make. But again, this is a very long document, 6 pages with a lot of depth, and it's not the longest that I've seen. I'm doing a good job as far as keeping it under 10 pages because there's a lot of documents that you'll get from AI or just other people that would be 10, 20, 30 pages. Again, maybe to try to showcase their expertise in a certain way, but I always think a less is more approach has always worked better. And so what I want to do is maybe even make it less and more by doing a deck. And so this deck is supposed to display the same ideas, but in a much more readable way. So this here, again, very simple cover letter. You have the audit structure here going over the same things that we just went over. And then we have critical gaps, which is just highlighting some of the things already that we're seeing to make sure we can start to paint the picture of the gaps of where they are and where they want to be. This critical gaps is kind of like an overview and then gives them kind of an information of just what I mean by that, what tech deck is, the overall idea of bloat and inefficiency in the front and back end, and so on and so forth. Then we move into further widening the gap by introducing more critical gaps and more information on these critical gaps and giving a bit of a one-liner to let people know what is happening here. Let them know why we have this idea that we need to move into the next steps. And then once we have this, we explain the next steps, which is the game plan. A 2-month rebuild with bi-weekly check-in calls, 1 to 2 written updates per week. That'll give you a new front end, a new back end, and the ability for their team to make minor adjustments in bulk going forward. I put a list here so they can feel like we have a prioritized fixed list. So we'll go down and do this. So once again, we have this one, and then the section on the right, which is basically painting the picture of all the things that we need to fix. And on the left-hand side here, we're showing the solution. And then lastly, we have a potential look so that the front end, they can see that we have the ability to create something that's clean and simple, and then potential look 2 if they wanted to go for something a little bit different. But presenting these are not necessarily going to be the final look. We still need to kind of agree on mockups and screens and functionality and things like that. But this is A, just showcasing that we can design something good, and B, showcasing that the same way that we're thinking about the cleanliness of the code, we're thinking about the cleanliness of the user experience. And that, I believe, is something that's underrated. Again, you have the ability to do these kind of mockups, so why not add them in? It really, really, really does make a difference, in my opinion, because you're just showcasing that you have enough foresight, you have enough taste to be able to make something that is pleasant to look at. You don't want to just make something that, solves the problem technically if no one's going to use it. And so this is an example of doing that and showing that and making sure that it's actually quite obvious that that's what we're doing. Okay. So I'm pretty happy with this one as is. What I need to do now is to kind of recreate all this for a different build with the same client. They have 2 builds that they want us to do something like this on, but we want to make sure that we treat them as separate builds in terms of the documentation. Just for clarity on their end, we'll sell that all as a package deal, but for clarity, we want to make sure that it's something quite simple. Okay, so this deck was something previously that was 13 pages long and had a lot of technical components to it and just didn't really speak the language of what I would consider to be CEO language. Okay, and I wanted to redo it to make sure that we are speaking in the language of the CEO, which means clear and simple, action oriented, problem and solution focused, and moving towards the end goal. All right, so I took a deck that was 17 pages and made it into these 6. Now, you could argue that we should find a sweet spot in the middle. We have 12 because you need to build a little bit more. But for the most part, I think I have the main components. The first one is just outlining the entire process, what we're doing. We're focusing on analyzing what we currently have, pruning to get some stuff that actually matters, and then perfecting that stuff that remains. The feature bloat in this case is the biggest thing. And this is very common for a lot of builds, maybe even potentially your builds. 3 to 5 core features is ideal for any sort of app or product. Anything more than that, and you're running into the issue of just user confusion. Basically, they're just too confused to use the dang thing. Or as importantly, the inability to maintain all the features. If you have 6 features, but 80% of people use one, but 10% of people use one other one, that one could cause a lot of headache when it's not even the core feature. So it's better to start smaller and to keep it small. Whereas something like this has bloated all the way to 34 features is what I counted. We want to just go down to the initial and important 3. This is also causing downstream issues, meaning because we have all these products and features, we have 64 automations, broken data links, generic naming and labeling, user role inconsistency, stale data, duplicated data across wastewater and drinking water, unsupported UI elements, unintentional access granted to roles. So because there's so much surface area of things to actually manage and take a look at, all these things are slipping through the cracks. And it makes it horrible to go in there as an engineer and try to fix stuff because there's like 20 problems and you're just trying to focus on one. And then it's like the Medusa head or the head that you cut off one head of the dragon and then a couple other heads show up. So it makes it very difficult for an engineer to go in there and maintain it. So what we want to do is recommend 3 ideal features and then +2 if necessary, just to kind of save ourselves, because if they deem some stuff really, really necessary for whatever reason, we can have that conversation and then together decide on what actually deserves to be built out. We also want to make sure that we sell the idea of instead of revising from what they currently have, meaning revising within software, we're focusing on rebuilding within a custom platform, which allows us to have everything that we really need. We have the ability to back up all the information that they currently have and maintain a lot of what they currently have, while also we can move into something a lot better for them and their users. Because with a custom interface, we can move things a lot more specifically than these drag and drop builders. And we can also insert a lot more functionality in the back end. With something like software, we're really kind of contained to what they have within their building blocks. But with custom software, we obviously have a lot more to play with. And then last one here is just a little bit more detail on what the rebuild actually looks like, what it would go through, and then how we would go about doing that for them. So again, I took something that was 17 pages just to show you really quick here. It is going to be something that has all these different things, the kind of main ideas, but it's split across a couple different areas. And it's just got some stuff that's a little less clean than I would like it to be. I made it the simple 6-slide basics to make sure we're going through all of it that we need without overwhelming the person that's reading this, and making sure that we have a clear plan, a problem painted, and a solution painted in the next steps. So this stuff here, these things are very important for your sales calls to make sure you can actually sell the why behind what you're building, right? And again, we're focusing on the context of building these apps for businesses. If you want to go and have users, meaning like very low ticket, sub $100 a month subscriptions for users, you need to treat them with the same kind of respect. You want to understand from them what's working and what's not working. And you have to do it across time, you have to do it across use cases, and you have to have a lot of these users to even get that feedback. We're in a situation where we have one business that's using this. Yes, they have other people using this, but we're talking to one main source that has all these different problems and situations that we can design for. If you're new in this space, this is why I recommend going towards this route, selling apps and custom builds to businesses, because you get a lot more insight without the problem of trying to go and market users, convince them to sign up, get feedback, and then move that into the iteration cycle. Those users are a lot less sticky because there's not a lot of buy-in already. There's all these different offers, and likely they're going to see that yours doesn't do it, not even offer any feedback, and then just move on. And if you're good at marketing, you can do that, and there is a way to do that. But I always recommend going this path, building for businesses, so you can really tighten up the screws and make sure every other component of it is good, and you're not having a marketing issue, and when you should be focusing on the building itself. That being said, if you want to learn more about this entire process, check out the school in the link below, and we'll detail everything that you need to know on how to audit, how to prune, and how to perfect, just like the slide says here.